It started on a cold autumn day when he stumbled upon the pocket watch. The air was crisp, the streets bustling with life. Yet there was something different about that day. He wandered into an antique shop he had never noticed before, tucked away between larger, more modern buildings. The shop smelled of dust and age, the kind of place that seemed stuck in time. He was browsing half-heartedly when the watch caught his eye. There, resting in a small, velvet-lined box, it gleamed faintly under the dim light. An ornate, golden pocket watch with intricate engravings on its surface. It felt oddly warm in his hand, as if it had been waiting for him. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a knowing smile, said little. He merely watched as the man paid and left, as if aware of the watch's dark secret. The walk home felt different that day. The world seemed quieter, as if the noise of the city had dulled. He kept glancing at the watch, feeling its weight in his pocket, wondering what stories it held. But he never could have guessed what would happen next. That night, after placing the watch on his bedside table, he slept more deeply than he had in weeks. The soft ticking was almost soothing, a steady rhythm in the quiet darkness of his room. But when he awoke, the air felt different, thicker, heavier. The room was shrouded in darkness despite the early morning hour. He reached for the clock beside his bed, but its hands hadn't moved since 3:15 a.m. The silence was unnerving, and as his eyes adjusted to the dark, he realized the only sound was the ticking of the pocket watch. It was relentless, louder than it should have been. He checked the wall clock again, thinking maybe it had stopped. But no, everything else in the room seemed frozen in time, except for the watch. There was something wrong with it, he thought, but it was late and he was too tired to care. So he ignored the eerie stillness and forced himself back to sleep. The days passed, and the watch never left his side. But with each passing day, something changed. Time didn't seem to move the way it should. Entire hours vanished without explanation. He would sit at his desk, lost in thought, only to glance at the clock and realize that half the day was gone. Meetings were missed, conversations forgotten. Time was slipping through his fingers, and with it, his sense of reality. He tried to shake the feeling. Maybe it was just exhaustion, he told himself. Maybe he was overworked. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just stress. The watch. It was the watch. Every time he held it, time seemed to bend, to twist around him. But the watch itself never changed, ticking away steadily, its hands never faltering. His friends noticed the change. They commented on how tired he looked, how distracted he seemed. But he couldn't explain it to them. How could he? How do you tell someone that time is no longer something you can trust? It was on the 7th day that the true horror began. That night he awoke again to the sound of the ticking watch. But this time, it wasn't soft. It was loud, deafening, as if it was coming from inside his own head. He glanced at the bedside clock. It was stuck again at 3:15 a.m. He sat up, his heart racing. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The room felt off, like the air was too still. As he turned his head, he saw it. The watch was glowing faintly in the darkness, casting a pale golden light across the room. And then, the shadows began to move. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, the shadows in the corners of his room were shifting, growing. And then he realized they weren't just shadows. They were watching him. He could feel their gaze, cold and unblinking. Panic rose in his chest as the ticking grew louder, faster. filling his mind until it was the only sound he could hear. From that night on, the watch never stopped. Its ticking followed him everywhere, a constant presence that he couldn't escape. Time became meaningless. Days bled into nights, and nights into days. He stopped leaving his apartment, too afraid of what might happen if he did. The world outside seemed distant, as though it were slipping further away with each passing minute. But it wasn't just time that was unraveling. His mind was too. He began seeing things, figures standing in the corners of his vision, vanishing the moment he turned his head. Voices whispered his name from the shadows, soft and mocking, as if they knew something he didn't. He stopped sleeping, unable to close his eyes without seeing the shifting shadows. But the worst part wasn't the shadows or the voices. It was the feeling that time itself was hunting him, that it was waiting to consume him completely. And the watch, oh, the watch, was its instrument, the thing that had set it all in motion. On the seventh night, the watch stopped. It was sudden, like a switch had been flipped. The ticking that had followed him for so long ceased, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. He stared at the watch, waiting for it to start again, but it didn't. The hands were frozen, stuck at 3:15 a.m., just like the first night. But as the silence stretched on, he realized something far worse. Time had stopped, not just for the watch, but for everything. The world around him was frozen in place. The clock on the wall, the flickering lights, even the shadows, all unmoving, trapped in a single moment. And then, in the stillness, he felt it. Time wasn't gone. It was watching him, waiting. The truth was clear now. Time hadn't been slipping away from him. It had been pulling him in, trapping him in this endless moment, a prisoner to the watch. And as he sat there, staring into the frozen face of the clock, he knew there was no escape. Time had claimed him,